I'm Courtney Germain. My pronouns are she, her.
And I'm Sharon Ethier. My pronouns are also she, her.
Today we are going to be discussing creating shared agreements in the classroom. As an additional resource for you, the slide deck for this presentation is also shared with you so that you are able to revisit any ideas or access any links featured in this presentation.
This video will help to explain why shared agreements are important, how to implement them in the classroom, and how to use them all year as a living resource through additional lessons, learning extensions, and strategies.
Shared agreements are known by many names, and we will come across some of those names throughout this presentation. You may hear them referred to as student contracts, class promises, etc. The creation of shared agreements is a way to build community with students and to ensure that each student feels empowered to advocate for the learning environment and relationships that they need. It gives opportunity for everyone to agree on their role in the classroom and cultivates the conditions for respectful understanding of one another. It is important whenever we implement something in the classroom that we begin with an intent. That intent will guide us along the path to be successful. The intent for shared agreements will look different depending on the teacher and depending on the students in the class. Take a minute to engage with these reflection questions to guide your thinking toward creating your own intention. What is the intent behind building community with each other in our classrooms? What impact could this have for students?
The curriculum front matter specifically addresses the necessity and responsibility to foster an inclusive environment. The creation of shared agreements is one way to support an environment which is essential for students' dignity and learning. An inclusive environment is based on the principles of human rights, equity, and inclusion. It fosters and builds a learning space where everyone feels like their voices are heard and they belong. Take a minute to pause this video and read over these quotes from Considerations for Planning and find which words or phrases make most sense to you. Fostering learning inclusive environments requires intentionally building healthy relationships between students and adults, and between adults. Healthy relationships are based on respect, caring, empathy, trust, and dignity, and thrive in an environment in which diversity is honored and accepted. Take a minute to pause this video and read over these quotes from Considerations for Planning and find which words or phrases make most sense to you.
Last spring, we were able to meet with a group of DSBN secondary students. Using Thought Exchange, they were able to anonymously share their thinking and experiences about what needs to happen in order for school to be an inclusive experience. Take a moment to read the student voices. You will notice that there are similar ideas that were shared. When students use their voices to advocate for themselves and others, as educators, we need to take steps to cultivate the conditions that they need. Co-creating agreements for how we all wish to be treated is a way to support student advocacy. Remember that shared agreements are not a list of classroom rules to follow. If students brainstorm a checklist of must-dos, for example, put your name on your work, try shifting student thinking to how we should treat each other and what we should do to help ourselves and each other feel comfortable, happy, and ready to learn in the classroom.
Let's dive into some ideas and examples of how to create and use shared agreements. This example featured here on this slide comes from Being the Change by Sarah Ahmed. It's essential when creating shared agreements that students are directly involved in the process. Know that the learning around shared agreements happens in the journey, not just the destination. Anything we do that is intentional and purposeful shouldn't be rushed. It takes time to co-create projects with a big group of people, so take your time and enjoy the learning. Find a way that works for your class that ensures all voices are heard. All classes are different. Some may need to start with some individual reflection before group work so that we can ensure all student ideas feel valued. Considering the needs of your group, how will you make space for discussion? Will you use a text image, video, or piece of writing to inspire ideas? Try to remember that these agreements are not classroom rules. These agreements should be based on how we interact and treat each other. and what we believe about a safe space in our classrooms. While there's room for classroom rules about physical safety and routines and expectations, they just might belong in a different place than these shared agreements.
Some possible strategies to support your students in creating shared agreements might be defining what shared agreements are. It may be their first time co-creating something like this in the classroom. Students may need some time to reflect on their experiences in school, what class environments they've had before, or what they'd like to see in a safe classroom. You might consider using an approach like a graphic organizer or a list. It's always helpful to break down ideas and to support brainstorming. You might consider sharing some different scenarios with students and asking what they like about them, what they would change in their ideal class. After engaging with some of these brainstorming strategies, we will need to begin creating the agreements and use the approach that works best for students, whether it's statements, a list, a graphic organizer, or something else. Whichever approach is chosen should be something that can hold us accountable, something more permanent that we can use, revisit, and anchor our ideas, like a piece of chart paper, a bulletin board, or a slide on a slide deck, etc. Some suggestions to spark ideas and brainstorming include looking at a quote together and unpacking how the messages in the quote connect to a safe classroom. Another suggestion might be a class discussion around an unlearned design that can support critical thinking, or even a read aloud and picking out details that make a safe classroom or details we might change from the story.
Here are some examples from primary, junior, and intermediate classrooms on how agreements might look. Take a moment to think about how this might look in your classroom. In the examples we've shared in this slide deck, educators took more than one teaching period to thoughtfully collaborate on their agreements. Be aware it does take time to scaffold student thinking and be authentic. Here are some additional resources like lesson plans that can support you in creating agreements in the classroom. Let's just take a look at one of these links, Contracting from Facing History and Ourselves. You'll be able to check out the other links in the attached slide deck. What we really love about this particular resource is that it has some step-by-step suggestions on how to contract and create that with your students. But do feel free to reach out if you want some support in implementing those lessons.
The next section will give you the tools to not just create shared agreements, but use them as a living support in the classroom all year round. Here are some tips to extend the learning around shared agreements all year. Let's remember that just because we've created them doesn't mean we know how to practice them in an active way. Students should have opportunities to practice the agreements on an ongoing basis, perhaps through team building or community building. Agreements can be used as a support for classroom conversations and can be brought in as a tool during disagreements or conflict. They should be circled back to regularly and edited or added to as the culture of the classroom evolves. One resource to support you with the extending of the learning all year is the Building Community Toolkit. This toolkit created by the equity team has explicit instructions around building community in the classroom and can be found in this presentation as well as on the equity website.
Some best practices for extending the learning are focus on one specific agreement during a collaborative activity. Self-assess as a class, whether we upheld an agreement or the agreements during a lesson or activity. Reflect on a tough moment or communication breakdown using the agreements. Consider together what might happen after someone breaks an agreement. How does that person respond? How does the class respond? Lastly, some considerations to think of as you are planning. Process, not product. Remember that the learning happens through the process. Embrace the journey. Every group is unique. It's okay if some strategies work better for different groups. Skills take time to learn. Stay the course and don't give up. Tap on your resources and supports. Reach out to the equity coaches for support and revisit the agreements often. Give opportunities for practice. We all need check-ins and updates sometimes. Thank you all so much for listening to the presentation, and we look forward to connecting with you.
Thanks, everybody.